The world is in chaos and turmoil. We all know that. It's indisputable. Media spells it out and stokes it, and at the same time distracts us with frivolous TV show reviews and food articles. And maybe we need a break from the relentless horror of the world. It is overwhelming. But we can't hide our heads in the sand. Pretty soon, that's all there will be is sand. We won't have to hide our heads. We'll be buried up to our necks. We see right-wing movements surging virtually everywhere, with few exceptions. Why? Why are right-wing, authoritarian, nationalistic, regressive movements thought to be an antidote to these problems? It's sad to see people willing to give up their freedoms, especially knowing it's not going to work. But I also understand how people around the world looking at the neoliberal globalization free market policies and acknowledging that they have failed. I was reading about Kenya, a country we have employed to settle the unrest in Haiti due to what was probably an American-backed coup and assassination of their president, who have lost control in their own country, where tax increases and other unfair policies have led to protests and death. These are the kinds of stupid, nonsensical, absurdist answers and non-solutions, the madness that every citizen can see through. Bolivia, with its prices out of control so that citizens can't afford their basic goods, recently had a military coup. It failed, but the problems remain, and that won't be the end of it. What do we see as the commonality of these countries and our own? A failure to address these long-range systemic problems dating back decades, which in each of these countries and ours include both liberal, and I say liberal for lack of a better label. I hesitate to say left-wing because they really aren't left-wing, and right-wing leaders, both driven by greed and self-interest. But perhaps that bell finally tolls for thee. Hard to relate to Bolivia and Kenya? What about France, our Western ally? They are in the process of an abject rejection of these globalist policies and replacing it with a right-wing, vaguely fascistic regime. And believe me, it's not happening because Macron has been a success. We use words like democracy when that has become perhaps the biggest lie. Certainly in this country, ruled by dark money donors and special interests and bought-off judges and an electoral college and no choices in our candidates and a coming climate disaster that doesn't care what party you support or what state you live in. We're not fooling anybody by calling it democracy when it's clearly a corrupt, institutionalized system that they've purposely made impossible to unravel without a revolution. And then what? We all know it, and we all see it anywhere we look. The rich are getting richer, though what will their wealth be worth in a worthless world? And the poor get poorer and poorer and poorer. It's kind of crazy. And can anyone look into the future and see it getting better? No, we all know it's getting worse, and it may be an inertia, a global crash that's too late to stop. The end of World War II was probably our last chance to set a course of fairness and equality and justice. But greed prevailed, and here we are. Does anyone really believe in the government anymore? Not a specific government, a Biden administration or a Trump administration, a Labor or conservative government. I'm talking about the very concept of government itself. Is there anyone who hears for the people and by the people who doesn't want to shout bullshit? It doesn't matter what side of the equation you're on. You know it's a lie. But what's scary is it's not just America. It's every single country in the world. Country, another concept that has broken down and been rendered meaningless. Yes, perhaps you'll point to England or Poland, but it's not a monolithic movement and we don't all go down at the same time, at the same speed. The Labour Party is not going to resolve England's woes, and they'll likely call for another election in a year or two. These are band-aids on gaping wounds that are hemorrhaging and for which we don't have cures or solutions, and increasingly don't even have stopgap measures. Here, we keep being told our economy is good. It's thriving. Employment is up. But how can that be when we know the price of everything has skyrocketed while wages remain poverty level low? More people are working their asses off all the time, 3 and 4 jobs, and still not making it each month. And you wonder why we have a homeless problem. You wonder why we have an immigration problem when we've squeezed and choked our neighbors and bled them dry and have turned workers into slaves who can't afford to live in their home countries anymore. And then we hate them for coming here. It's just a circle of horror. Every country is in debt to someone, and the wealthiest countries, like us, have the most debt. Where does that lead? How can that sustain? We know it can't. There's a price we all have to pay, and that bill is coming due. And people are angry, and they're not putting up with it anymore, from all sides of the political equation. Do you think if Trump is elected, it's going to solve anything? Instead of right-wing insurrections and civil unrest and violent protests, there will be left-wing insurrections and civil unrest and violent protests. And everyone has access to weapons now. How can it not be? How do you stop that? It transcends political ideology. Most countries spend more paying off their debt than spend on health and education. We here can stave it off a little longer, but impoverished countries cannot. And make no mistake, America's debt is the highest in the world, depending on the equations you use. But even if you obfuscate it with false measurements, it's still in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. You think it will ever get paid back? Yet you pay your rent and your car debt, and if you don't, you lose them. And we're told to basically accept that inequality. Shortages, protests, strikes, coups, failed or not, unrest, violence from all sides, get used to it. Because our leaders have no answers, and they don't deserve our support. They haven't earned it. That's where the true debt begins. They owe us. And when someone doesn't pay you back, you have to take it.